What is going on, guys? My name is Aaron, and this is the Game Day Hour. Welcome back to another episode of the Game Day Hour, and today we are going to be doing something a little bit fun, a little bit interesting, and pretty subjective. I'm going to go week by week, from week one all the way to the Super Bowl, and just listing all the great games that happened this year, in my opinion. It could be based on, do I think the game was great? Was I surprised by the outcome? What did I like about the game? Did I learn something about the game? But each week we're going to take the best game and we're going to see why I say it's the best game. You're going to find that a lot of these games are going to be random and odd, and you'll see why. I'll explain each game as I get to them. But yeah, if you enjoyed this type of content, please leave a like, comment down below, and subscribe. And also leave questions in the comment section, TikTok, or any social media so you can see them at the end of the podcast. Anyways, thank you for watching. Let's do this. All right, so let's go week by week and see what I think is the best game of each week. Starting with week one, my favorite game of week one was the Detroit Lions and the Kansas City Chiefs, the opening game of the year. I wanted to go in multiple directions with this one. The second game that was like really close was the Dallas Cowboys blowout game against the Giants or the Jets overtime win against the Bills. But I chose the Kansas City versus Detroit Lions game for one simple reason. Kansas City looked weak, and I was like, this is new. I did not see this coming. But secondly, Detroit looked alive. And I had Detroit winning the NFC this year, or the NFC North. And seeing them play the way they did against the Chiefs was a very nice touch to start the year off. I was impressed with how they played because you're in Arrowhead. It's one of the toughest places to play on the planet, whether it be coming the beginning of the season or come playoff time. It's really tough to win there. But Detroit looked like they handled it well and they had a great identity and they were not afraid. It looked great. So the Lions, they won 21-20, and yeah, they started the year off with a win in Arrowhead, which could have been a Super Bowl preview, but we'll get to that later. So there were many directions to go with the week two. You have Baltimore versus Cincinnati. That was a good game. You had Kansas City's first win, the Titans beating the Chargers in overtime. But my game is actually the New York Giants and the Arizona Cardinals. I know it's pretty weird, isn't it? Why would I put the Giants on here? They were terrible this year. Why would I put the Cardinals on here? They were also terrible this year. It's the fact that the Giants had to overcome what was nearly an impossible, and when I say impossible, I mean impossible comeback. So let's see. At halftime, they were down 20 to nothing. Third quarter, they were down 28 to 14, and they just stormed back, scoring from the second half, outscoring the Cardinals 31 to 8 in a 31 to 28 victory over Arizona. So this was the one time this year where we thought, oh, maybe the New York Giants have something. Maybe they woken up and come alive. It was a nice time for Giant fans. That didn't last long. For week three, I had three directions I was going to go. It was going to either be the Colts or the Ravens, that overtime win for Indianapolis. The second one would have been some Packers game, but we all know which game was the craziest game of the week. That was the Miami Dolphins demolition of the Denver Broncos, 70 to 20. One of the highest scoring games in NFL history. Not the highest. The highest scoring game happened decades and near centuries ago. It was a long time ago. It's 73 points by the Chicago Bears. Um, but 70 points in today's era, it was at that moment we knew the Dolphins were going to be a different kind of team this year. Well, at least it was at that moment. Obviously, that was subject to change later. But what Miami did to Denver, it was so incredible, that game, that I saw a short by Benchwarmer Brand, I believe his name is, where it was just showing the Bears being the most embarrassing team, but you have the Broncos losing the way they did to Miami. It was funny. You guys should go check it out. But seeing this score, is just downright terrifying. And if you were against your opponent and your opponent had Tyreek Hill or Tua, God bless you, because that is terrifying. So, I mean, this was a clear cut favorite. I mean, you could have also gone Cowboys and Cardinals because there's a lot of Cowboy haters out there. But this one is just undoubtedly the most shocking game of them all. A lot of interesting games in week four, but the one I wanted to pay attention to is the one I was looking the most forward to at the beginning of the season before Aaron Rodgers went out, but it still lived up to be a pretty good game. The Kansas City Chiefs and the New York Jets. Now, of course, the Jets were starting Zach Wilson because Aaron Rodgers went out with an Achilles tear in week one. Hopefully, he recovers and is able to play at a high level next year. This was a game that should have been a foreshadowing for the Chiefs' Super Bowl run because this was statistically one of Patrick Mahomes' worst games ever versus Zach Wilson, who statistically had one of his best games ever. And with all that said, the Chiefs still won 23 to 20, and it just shows that even at their worst, they were still an extremely dangerous team. It was also pretty fun. This was the beginning. It wasn't the first game of the era, but this was the beginning of like the Taylor Swift era, and this was one of the first games I watched of Kansas City when the Taylor Swift era began. Uh, but all I just remember is the Chiefs playing so bad and still winning. I can't tell if the Jets were just terrible or if the Chiefs at their worst is still pretty dangerous. It could be either or, but this was week four's best game. It was Sunday night primetime too as well. There's only one direction you can go with week five. It's the Niners' demolition of the Dallas Cowboys. So this, you think as a Cowboys fan, this is not the game I would choose, but it was actually the most humbling experience of my football life because I used to be one of those Cowboy fans that was the "It's our year, we them boys" type fans. But after this game against the Niners, it was the first time I ever been humbled so badly that I had to take a step back and like I got to take being a fan a little differently because otherwise I'm going to keep getting disappointed. Because not only did we lose to the Cardinals, but to lose the way we did to the Niners was, to say the least, embarrassing. But it surprisingly is not the most embarrassing game this year the Cowboys played. What the Niners did was just sound. It was at that moment I thought the Niners were going to go to the Super Bowl. I had them as Super Bowl favorites, but that was like almost my insta lock at that moment, and just kind of seeing what came out of it, it was definitely clear that the Cowboys were not a Super Bowl contending team, and I just had to accept that reality. So it was just an eye opener, and because of that, I have respect for the Niners, obviously. So I can't be too mad, but at the same time, I was really upset in that game. But it changed the way how I viewed being a fan. So that's a good thing in its own right, especially if you don't like Cowboy fans. For the Week 6 matchup, I had to include the Philadelphia Eagles New York Jets game because there's no way I was thinking that the Eagles were going to lose this game. They were undefeated at the time with the Niners. It just blew my mind how the Eagles could not get it done against the New York Jets. But I also had the New York Jets defense on fantasy, and I had Brees Hall. They both played extremely well, and this was like towards the beginning of my super win streak that I had going into the playoffs and ultimately won the championship. Because after week four, I never lost again. I won every single week. And the Jets played an integral role, and this game was no exception. Brees Hall had his touchdown at the end, game winning touchdown, but the Jets defense was just straight up on fire. They played an incredible game. I mean, the first half they gave up 14, maybe the first half, first quarter, but then afterwards, like, they just locked it down. They were that team. They played like that team. And if the Jets had Aaron Rodgers, man, this year, the Jets could have been extremely dangerous with how good their defense has been. Ooh, I really love what the Jets have done on the defensive end. So this game was great, mostly because the Eagles lost, but it was also good to see the Jets actually win a meaningful game. There were a bunch of good games in week seven, but the one I actually want to look at is the Cleveland Browns Indianapolis Colts. Now, as you know, the Colts and the Browns dealt with injury all year long. The Browns lost Deshaun Watson in this game against the Colts, and the Colts lost Anthony Richardson a little bit prior. Uh, but this game lived up to what was no hype to an ultimately hyped game. 39-38, a shootout in Indy. But the reason why I chose this game over others is because this was like the beginning of the Cleveland Browns becoming that quote unquote team that can win with any quarterback. This was like the game that first proved it. I know they beat the Niners the week prior uh, with a backup quarterback, but in this game, and they lit it up. I'm trying to think what would the year look like if they got Joe Flacco earlier, but man, was this a nice game for Cleveland. And this was also the coming out party for the backup running back for Cleveland, Jerome Ford, for me personally. And it also had one of the toughest endings I've ever seen, just very tough. It was a fun game. I got to watch a little bit of it. Normally I would not watch the Cleveland Browns, but I kind of had to. This game was living up to the hype, and I'm glad I did. This was my favorite game in week 7. Week eight's best game for me, this is the one time I'm going Homer, is the Dallas Cowboys win over the Los Angeles Rams. Now, the Cowboys played below tier competition all year long. They were dismantling bad teams and not playing great against good teams. This was the one out of two instances where the Cowboys had actually no, three instances where the Cowboys had a good win against a good opponent. Now the Rams at the time were not playing great, but they would eventually pick it up. They were still, as destructive as they ever were, and the Cowboys just put up 43 points. This was Dak Prescott's like one of Dak Prescott's best games this year in his MVP moment, even though he didn't win MVP. This was one of his MVP games. So, as a Cowboys fan, this made me feel good. I gained a little bit of confidence back, not too much for the Super Bowl, but I was like, okay, well, maybe the Cowboys have finally got it together. Dak Prescott's playing different, and the Cowboys continue to play like this. Hey, sky's the limit. So, this was a nice game for Dallas, and I'm glad that the Cowboys finally had this because it was, I was being tortured as a football fan. But then again, I was being tortured on both ends because college football Notre Dame was upsetting me a lot as well. So. You know about that boy Joshua Dobbs? Well, week nine's game is the Vikings comeback win over the Atlanta Falcons 31-28 because Joshua Dobbs, a player who I barely knew about until the Cowboys played the Titans. That's the first time I ever knew about this guy. Of course, he goes to the Cardinals. He beats Dallas with the Arizona Cardinals, and then he gets moved midway through the season to the Minnesota Vikings in replacement of Kirk Cousins, and he looked good. Dobbs looked great. I was very impressed with how he was playing, and in this game against the Falcons, I thought he put on an amazing performance, a comeback performance, both on the ground and through the air. He was incredible. There's not that many games that interested me in Week 9, but this was the one where I'm like, I like what I'm seeing. I think he can be a pretty good starting quarterback on some team. I don't know what team, but he could definitely be a starter somewhere. You tell me the team, and we could both agree on it. Mostly, I'm leaning towards the Falcons, but that's just kind of me. But I think Dobbs is a starter if you give him the right shot. And yeah, I had to say that the Vikings win over Atlanta was very, very satisfying. Then you had Week 10, the Houston Texans' close victory against the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, the Bengals at the time still had Joe Burrow. I think the next week he got injured. I'll have to check. But this was the moment I realized CJ Stroud was turning into a star because the game prior, I'm pretty sure they played the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He looked amazing in that game too, and in this game against Joe Burrow, who by the time you get to midseason, Joe Burrow is one of the toughest quarterbacks to play against in the entire National Football League, and he went into the jungle and took care of business against Cincinnati, leading drive after drive. CJ Stroud looked like a star there, and at that point, I was like, "Ooh, the Jaguars, they're in trouble because the Texans look like their rebuild happened extremely fast and have all the pieces they need." As a matter of fact, Houston is close to being a playoff lock for me. If they do the right things in the draft, which I think they will, um, you had to give it to Stroud and that offense. They looked amazing, and that was like one of their best games all year long. Then you have the Week 11 matchup. There's only one answer to this. It's the Super Bowl 57 rematch between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. It was a Monday night game in Arrowhead. Troy Aikman, Joe Buck. Amazing, amazing game. It was a tough game, too. I mean, for a while I was watching, I was actually home alone when I was watching this. It really upsets me because I hate the Eagles, but the Eagles managed to outduel Patrick Mahomes. But I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the receivers couldn't catch anything. It was just a frustrating game to watch. I mean, the Chiefs at so many moments should have won that game, but turnovers, dropped catches, they just shot themselves in the foot, and Philadelphia took advantage of it. But Philadelphia didn't look great either. I mean, throughout the year they were winning, they did not look excellent at all. And because of this that's why this game was so frustrating. I mean, Philadelphia shouldn't have won this game, but because Kansas City was struggling harder, kind of see where I'm coming from with this. But hats off to Philadelphia. And as a matter of fact, for Philadelphia, they are back to back weeks of being the game of the week. Their next game was against Buffalo. And the Bills, at the time, they did not look great. But in this game, Buffalo looked amazing. There's just one problem. When the second half comes around, Philadelphia comes alive. And I just think that every other team starts to get worse. Philadelphia just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. They were clawing their way back into this game, and they took the lead for a little bit and went back to Buffalo. Field goal, overtime. Buffalo misses out on a touchdown on a poor route by Gabriel Davis or a poor throw by Josh. It's either of the or. And then Philadelphia just chipped away in overtime to win that game. But this was the last time the Eagles looked great all year long, and after this, they couldn't get it back together. But this game was fun to watch. It was a game that even though my team wasn't playing, I was jumping up and down because it was exciting. So yeah, I have to give it to the Eagles. They looked good for like 2 weeks in a row against two great opponents. And you'd think I'd say the 49ers victory over the Eagles was the game of the week for week 13, but I actually have to go with Sunday night. Kansas City in Lambeau against Green Bay. To me, I talked about a few coming out parties. You had the CJ Stroud, you had the Joshua Dobbs. This was the Jordan Love coming out party for me. Love managed to do against Kansas City was extremely impressive. And by the way, his first ever solo start as a player in the NFL was against Kansas City in Arrowhead. So they didn't win that matchup, but then they got him on their turf and they took care of business. Now, the ending was pretty controversial, a non-pass interference call, and of course, more drops. Just more errors, mental errors. I didn't really like it too much, but the thing about this game is that if you put a really impressive roster around Green Bay, this team could win the Super Bowl in the next, give it 3 to 5 years. I think Green Bay could win the Super Bowl. I actually think they have the right quarterback for the job. He looks like he's getting comfortable and just getting with that system. Somehow Green Bay just gets great quarterbacks after another. They don't play a lot of quarterbacks, but when they got their quarterback, they got him for good. And I think Jordan Love is that guy, and this game kind of proved it. But this was also the boiling point for the Kansas City Chiefs. Because it was about to get worse. The next week, the famous matchup of the new era, the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs, Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes. Um, this game lived up to the hype. I mean, it wasn't a high scoring game, but the defenses played great. Buffalo basically controlled this game for like the majority of it. But the reason why this game wins game of the week is for one simple reason. Darius Toney. I think you guys already know what I'm talking about. The offensive offsides by Kadarius Toney on what could have been the most incredible play of the year. He lines up offsides, and then that was the first time I ever seen Patrick Mahomes lose his mind. He doesn't lose it often, but he lost his mind towards the officiating. He lost his mind when shaking players' hands, and even when he got to the press conference. Yeah, he was not the same Patrick Mahomes, and I thought at this point the Kansas City Chiefs were done. There was no way I could count on the Chiefs to go to the Super Bowl, but this could have also been the turning point because when you're at rock bottom, the only place you can go is up. And I think Patrick Mahomes knew that because this was rock bottom for sure. And then next week, Thursday night football between the Raiders and the Chargers. Now, I don't remember what I was doing on this day. I think I was out and about. Maybe I was home. Maybe I was chilling. I was in the football mood. Wasn't wanting to watch football. Just kind of looking at fantasy here and there. And then the fourth quarter comes around. I go onto my phone to check ESPN. The scrolling through, some games on. Then I come across the Raiders score. It was 63-7. And I remember dropping my phone, getting on Prime Video, and going to check out the game immediately because I would have never thought in a million years that the Raiders were capable of scoring 63 points. But the reason why I also picked this game is not just because of the score, but that last touchdown they scored, the interception, the pick six, the one-handed pick six, just jumping the route, the one of the best route jumps I've ever seen in my entire life. And ultimately, the Chargers they scored a little bit, but I think by then it was too late. 63-21 was the final score. Aiden O'Connell, that he became a legend in Las Vegas at that time. But the Raiders looked amazing. 63-21. That's the second time this year that a team scored over 60 points. I can't remember every single time I've ever watched a game where a team scored more than 60 points. It doesn't happen very often, but this year it happened twice. That's insanity. I don't know if it's the rules or if offenses are just getting better, but that's insane. And I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, that Brandon Staley was he was fired after this. And if you're wondering, oh, well, Justin Herbert was injured, so you also had that. The next game was Monday night. The Ravens and the 49ers, the teams I thought who would have been in the Super Bowl. Obviously, I was incorrect. But it was Lamar Jackson versus Brock Purdy, one of the most athletic quarterbacks in the world, versus one of the most successful systematic quarterbacks, if you want to call him that, because he was running that system very well. Um, Brock Purdy looked awful. 4 interceptions. Terrible look. This was easily, at the time, the Ravens' best game that they've played. And another reason why this was a big game is because this was fantasy football semifinals. Had it not been for Justin Tucker going off in this game and kicking all those field goals, I would have not been in the championship. So I have to owe it to Justin Tucker. He played an amazing game, a lot of attempts, a lot of field goals. He got me enough points to win and move on to the championship as well. But this looked like a Super Bowl preview. I kind of wish it was. I think it would have been a lot nicer to see this game. Then the next game is the Dallas Cowboys victory over the Detroit Lions. This is for an actual opposite reason why this is the game of the week. As you guys all know, this was probably the most controversial ending to any football game this year, and there were a lot of controversial endings. But it comes down to the 2-point conversion where the Lions, in the referee's eyes, failed to report a player eligible, and that player caught a football for 2 points. It was called back. Now, it's controversial because the player, he most definitely let the referee know I'm eligible. The whole, I mean, we all saw it. I don't know how you get it mixed up, but then again, the officiating is not that great. So, I have to give it to the officials that the Cowboys ended up winning this game. But obviously you don't want to win a game on that. That's a poor way to win. But ever since then, when you watch a Lions game, anytime they're trying to do a play like that, the guys go like this, like, "Well, trying to let you know." It's that type of game. Oh, poor Detroit Lions fans. Don't worry, everything would be okay. And then the last game of the year before the playoffs, Week 18. Obviously, there weren't a lot of fun games because it was rivals week and a lot of teams were just sitting out. So I have to go with the Bills versus the Dolphins. I mean, the Dolphins at this point were taking a slide, and the Bills were going up like this. Um, yeah, Buffalo. They didn't play a great game, but they played an okay game. This was probably the most boring football game of all the games I'm talking about so far. Because you'd think this would be a shootout or a blowout. This was nothing. This was a very boring game. But because it was the one matchup that actually mattered, it gets the nod. But I have nothing more to say about it. Then you got the playoffs. I gotta go with Miami and Kansas City. Like I kind of wanted to go with the Green Bay game against Dallas, but the wind chill was negative 27 degrees. The game was frozen in Arrowhead. So much to the point where water bottles were freezing. Andy Reid's beard or mustache was frozen. And Patrick Mahomes' helmet just breaks super easily on a hit. It was clear that this was a very tough game for both teams to play in. I don't even care if Kansas City has played in so many cold games. You can't get acquainted with something like this. But Kansas City looked great. They won to move on to play their first road playoff game against the Buffalo Bills in the divisional round. Patrick Mahomes' first game on the road, and he went toe to toe with Josh Allen, which he always does during the playoffs, and he defeats Josh Allen. Now, albeit there was a missed field goal that ultimately costed Buffalo the game, but for a while it was a back and forth affair. It was a really competitive game, and I liked what I saw. But this game obviously gets the clear nod because Patrick Mahomes wins his first ever road playoff game in his first ever road playoff game too. So that's where that goes. Um, but for the conference championship, I have to give it to the NFC championship because the Niners were down 24-7 at halftime and stormed back, albeit a little bit of luck in there, but stormed back nonetheless. The Lions just could not get anything done on offense after a while. Kept going for it on fourth down. I understand that the Lions have a very aggressive game plan, and I respect it. I think that if more teams took this aggressive approach, there'd be a lot more confidence in locker rooms. But I thought at some points you should have just taken field goals, and they didn't. And so I feel like they sort of shot themselves in the foot. I mean, if somebody storms back from 17 down, you're shooting yourself in the foot. So it makes sense. But yeah, Niners move on to the Super Bowl to play the Kansas City Chiefs. But good season for Detroit nonetheless. I mean, they had no playoff success until that point. So, congratulations. And then, of course, the Super Bowl. I already went into details about this. It was a great game. I rate the Super Bowl an 8 out of 10. I thought it was entertaining. Great halftime show. A good back and forth battle between Purdy and Mahomes. It's not my favorite Super Bowl, though. I have to give last year's Super Bowl my favorite. But yeah, those are all the games throughout the weeks of the NFL that I enjoyed watching and was very interested to watch each and every single week. I know there's some games on here that just did not make sense, and I like it that way. So, get to the outro. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you do, please leave a like, comment down below, and subscribe. Uh, Please be sure to go follow me on all my social medias and send me questions to answer in these episodes. I realize I keep just putting it on TikTok, and I'm not getting anything there, so I'm going to go to other social medias, of course. But yeah, send me some questions. If you don't want me to say your name on the podcast, you just say, call me anonymous, and I'll be sure to leave your name out. But other than that, that will be it for today. One of the episodes I think I want to do later, and actually by later I mean pretty soon, is a March Madness bracket. So look forward to that. And of course, NBA playoffs is nearby. So I'm going to sign off now. I hope you guys have a great day. Take care and goodbye.